Welcome to the Provider's Report, where we delve into the world of value-based healthcare. Our mission is to empower healthcare providers with the knowledge and tools they need to deliver exceptional patient care. Each episode, we explore best practices, innovative strategies, and real-world examples of how to achieve the highest standards in patient communication and outcomes. Join us as we transform the future of healthcare, one conversation at a time.
Hey guys, welcome to Better Doctor Project, where we interview healthcare providers to tap into their experiences so we can turn our challenges into our biggest strengths. We hope today's episode inspires you to take that next step to become who you want to be in practice. I'm Dr. Beck.
And I'm Dr. Mack.
Let's get started. Hey BDP fam, look, we all know that diversity and inclusion has been a very popular topic lately. Guess what though? It also applies to healthcare. This cannot be ignored, which is precisely why we decided to have Dr. William Foshee on our show. He is the absolute go-to for this topic in the chiropractic profession, and we can't wait to learn from him today. He currently serves as the chair for the Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the American Chiropractic Association, which has been doing incredible work over the last few years thanks to his leadership and commitment. In this episode, we're going to touch on why this topic even matters for our patients, for us as providers, and for the organizations and companies we're associated with. If you care about better patient outcomes and experiences like we do here at BDP, which I obviously hope you do, this episode is for you. Hey everyone, we are here with Dr. Foshee, and we're going to be talking about the importance of diversity in healthcare. So Dr. Foshee, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So we just want to start right off the bat with the most important question probably on the list tonight. And I just want you to kind of dive in and explain to us why this is so important for healthcare. Why do we need diversity in the first place? Why is it important? Why is it crucial for patients, providers, everybody? Can you just kind of tap into that for us?
Sure. The most important thing from my perspective is this understanding that patient outcomes are absolutely driven by the patient provider experience. And so oftentimes when folks don't see themselves reflected in their provider type or in the medical marketplace, there is this reservation oftentimes that goes into the healthcare encounter. And so, really the fundamental thing is, having a diverse medical workforce really does improve patient outcomes. And it's been demonstrated in, quite a few of the medical professions that these outcomes really matter based on diversity. Long answer.
Yeah, well, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, just like how diversity is important in every other facet of life, why would it not be this important for something like healthcare?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what do you think about where the U.S. is right now? Do you think we're doing really well in this category? Are we still really far behind? Where are we in terms of diversity in healthcare right now as a nation?
So I think that, some healthcare professions do a much better job of this than others. So, for example, the American Public Health Association, has a sort of, robust effort at recognizing that systemic racism is a significant threat to public health, that addressing the unique needs of people with, varying abilities or LGBT folks or religious or ethnic minorities, that giving attention to those aspects of health really does affect, these social determinants of health that are really these drivers in community-wide health. So some professions do a much better job than others. So, we were doing a few years ago this work with the American Chiropractic Association where we looked at other healthcare professions and what their professional organizations were doing for diversity. And again, some organizations are doing great work. So the American Medical Association has great stuff out there. And then some of the other physician types, like the dentist, optometrist, have varying, successes in reaching diverse populations. So you ask precisely or exactly, kind of where the U.S. is with this, and I would say that the U.S. is evolving in this, but like on the political spectrum, this is a sticking point. This sort of efforts at inclusion. So you get those same sticking points in the medical industry because it is a consumer-driven avenue of business.
Yeah. So what is something that organization is doing well that maybe some organizations aren't? I think you said it was the American Public Health, correct?
Yeah.
So what are some examples of things that they are doing that's made them, kind of jump leaps and bounds?
This in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement kind of, really popped back onto the American consciousness. For many people that didn't go away, but for some people it did really, truly sort of go away. And so this death of George Floyd and this, really pulling this to the forefront of the American consciousness really made it sort of impossible for any American to ignore the fact that there's this sort of systemic racism and that people who are further away from center and white, have these challenges in experiencing these societal inequities, which naturally include healthcare. So the American Public Health Association immediately made a statement about acknowledging that systemic racism is a risk to public health. Other organizations did the same thing. The American Chiropractic Association issued a statement on systemic racism. The American Medical Association, issued a statement. And so, one of the things that I think is really important is that, organizations and their constituent members can't just be statement makers, right? They have to be change makers. And one of the things that I've really kind of observed across the way is that organizations are doing that. I want to tell you about one of the coolest things that I've seen pop up in the past handful of months is the American Psychological Association. They are the organization that leads the way that folks are diagnosed and they're pathologized or depathologized. And so, this kind of goes across the spectrum of folks. So, with the implementation of the DSM-5, they sort of depathologized the transgender phenomenon, allowing transgender individuals to have like a broader access to healthcare. And so now what you see is third-party payers paying for, trans inclusive or trans affirming medical interventions, whether it's, therapy or medication or surgery or whatever the case might be. So the American Psychological Association, the APA, they issued a statement in the last month acknowledging their responsibility in creating societal inequity against minorities, specifically against Black Americans. It was such a profound statement. And then they went on after they make the statement to offer an addendum because they had additional clarifying statements to make. And I thought, that's a really powerful taking an action, right? And so, the implication there is not just acknowledging that racism is a problem, but saying, hey, we've contributed to this in a way that pathologized the experience of minority folks in the United States, which is the only place where the APA standards are sort of applied. And, and begin a conversation on how we can have a reparative action. I just thought it was really amazing.
One, to do it that way is it has such a high level of magnitude behind it. It just means so much more. And I mean, they almost like they obviously admitted faults, but in the way that they're bringing it up is so important. Everybody makes mistakes. Science changes all the time in healthcare too. We recognize that, it's okay to be wrong, but it's not okay to be wrong and keep being wrong, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so it's really cool to see someone, an organization that big say, hey, this is how things were back then. It doesn't have to continue to be that way. Let's take a stand today and make an actual change. Instead of just talking about it, let's actually make things different. I love that.
It's so admirable. We actually talked about it a little bit on our holiday bonus episode. from last season, we were talking about religious inclusivity as well and how to work the holidays in your office. And one of the things we talked about was that you are going to make mistakes. It's going to happen, and that's okay. It's how you bounce back, how you learn from them, and how you approach them in the future. And what an incredible example of just how to be a genuine human and recognize that we all have our faults, and then work together and collaborate on making the human race even stronger in our efforts for progress. It's just really exciting, and it seems like you can have these large statements, like you said, from multiple professional organizations, and they have a profound impact trickling down. But it sounds like it's a two-way street, and a lot of these come from grassroots efforts, right, within these organizations, or just conversations like we're having right now, that recognize that there's an issue and come together to try to find some of those solutions. Have you had some personal experiences where these conversations turn into something so much bigger, or maybe even like to the statement level of a massive or professional organization?
So I serve as the chair for the American Chiropractic Association Committee on Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I want to tell you that the ongoing conversation that has occurred at ACA absolutely laid the foundation for the ACA to issue a diversity statement and then a racism statement last summer following the incident with George Floyd. The ACA, I guess, I was just thinking about this. I gave my first presentation to the American Chiropractic Association in 2016 about diversity and inclusion. So I was a student, right? So, chiropractic is a second career for me. So I was always like a little older than my classmates. When I first graduated, it was amazing though, because nobody thought I was a new doc, right? They're like, oh, hey, it's great to meet you, right? And not like, oh, So
I need a beard.
right. Well, I mean, so I went to this conference and I gave this presentation with, these really sort of heavy hitters in the chiropractic profession. And I was definitely felt like I'm going to use a sport reference and hopefully I won't use it wrong. But, I kind of felt like I was like punching above my weight, right? Is that the right reference? So I definitely felt like the kid at the grown-ups table, because, these folks who I really held in such high esteem had invited me to come have this conversation. And so I think, to answer your question, have I seen this? Well, I think that that's exactly how the APA or the American Public Health Association lands in these conversations, is that some person who's affiliated with their organization has the capacity to exercise influence and has a conversation and says, oh, we're missing this. So that's exactly what happened with the ACA statement. Was there was a conversation, and it was acknowledged that this was missing, and then it was the racism statement was made. And of course that's how it happens in all organizations.
How do we, if we're in one of those organizations and we start thinking about this, right? Maybe someone's listening right now to this podcast and they're like, I have no idea what my organization does, or if they have a statement, or what their stance is. Obviously some of the stuff you can find on websites, but are there some things that you can make us aware of that will kind of tip you off to where an organization stands, or whether or not, they even need to take a better stance on diversity, whether or not there can be room for improvement, or whether they're already doing a great job? What are some things that we can look around to help analyze our own organizations or professional affiliations?
So as a person who has an intersectional identity. And so what I mean by intersectional identity, it means that, I have multiple places in my life where there's like a potential for some sort of, decreased access to something, or marginalization. So, intersectionality is oftentimes attached to women's studies, gender studies, or the feminism movement. And so I think that, opening up the organization's board of directors, board of trustees, and taking a look at who makes the decision, who is the driver for the organization's stances and standards on practices and inclusion. If there is not like a good reasonable representation in the makeup of those organizations, I don't know that they're probably doing like for me, um, I'm not buying into that, right? So like I want to go places where there are so in the chiropractic profession, particular, the chiropractic practice analysis comes out every 5 years. And so one of the things that they noted over 2020 versus 2015 was this um, increase in minority representation in chiropractors who have been in practice 5 years or less. So that means like in like 10 or 20 years that, that percentage of overall representation in the profession will be improved. So at the ACA, there are six board members serving. Three of them are women. The public member is minority, and that is not does not feel. And the three women, none of them are minority women or religious minorities. And so that's an assumption that I made. If they're religious minorities, it's not an apparent thing, right? So, when I look at ACA, where I serve in this capacity for diversity, at the surface, it wouldn't quite fit for me for feeling like, oh, this is a really diverse, organization that's doing diverse work. However, it is somewhat appropriately reflective of the chiropractic profession as a whole. And so, if I were a medical doctor, which, I think that most medical schools have these requirements. I think that most medical schools have a requirement that a percentage of the matriculating class has to be, female or minority or, some other sort of qualifying factor. And so the medical profession, you know, across the board is accepting, many more folks, they're training up to enter their professional workforce in a way that chiropractic is not quite doing. But that's where I start, is look at the top, right? If I don't see myself reflected in some place, or I don't see other intersectional folks somewhere, I'm really not willing to pay membership dues, not unless I feel like I can get going and sort of change things from the inside, which is what we've been working on at ACA.
Well, and you're being realistic too, because, you kind of have to be with these things. Like, we can't wake up tomorrow and expect the US to technically be 100% perfect in the world of racism and inequality tomorrow. There's things that need to happen first. And, I have some friends that, I love dearly, and I agree with them in all these political aspects. But to think that every single institution or every single company or organization or group in the U.S. should be 100% African American or 100% Jewish, that's also unrealistic and also poses a problem. We have to understand representation the way you just discussed. We have to understand equal opportunity, and we have to understand that the future is bright if we let it be bright. And so I love the way you just put that, because it can't just be this sunshine and rainbows thing that we want it to be. It has to make logical sense. And like you said, with the chiropractic profession, we're getting there. And I think because of all these young minorities that are coming out of our younger population, it's going to happen. And I'm really excited for it.
It just takes perseverance and patience.
It's not an overnight change, not at all. But one of the things that that I've kind of encountered in the past few years as I spend time with students is we ask these questions. Where do you see yourself reflected in leadership, right? And so even in scenarios where there's actually really well-known person. So I'll give you an example. So there's a student who serves on the diversity committee with me, and the student is Hispanic and is speaks Spanish in the home and is training to be a sport chiropractor. And I said, okay, great. Who is your go-to Hispanic sport chiropractor? And the student says to me, I don't have one. And I thought, oh, like I could name like 10, I could name like 5 in Dallas. Right. So, but what happens is like this person really doesn't see himself reflected like in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, I can also name a couple of really well-known Hispanic sport chiropractors who are even affiliated with our organization. in leadership and he doesn't know who they are. So not only, does he feel like he's like entering the, the market as a person who doesn't seem self-reflected, but he doesn't seem self-reflected in leadership when there is someone there. And I think that along the way, that is actually the, kind of the mission of the American Black Chiropractic Association, right? And so I want to take a second to plug membership for the ABCA. So I was on a conference call. I was at a diversity conference, and their president, Dr. Michaela Edwards, who, by the way, is probably one of my top 3 favorite people that I've ever had a conversation with. So Dr. Michaela Edwards is giving this, giving her talk, and she invited the attendees to join the ABCA. And I thought, oh yeah, I guess I don't have to be Black to join the ABCA. I don't have to, you know what I mean? I could just pay a membership dues to any organization that's a fit for my values, and they are a fit for my values. So, they, support minority enrollment, they support minority doctors, and they also support carrying the message of what chiropractic can do for a person's health into minority communities. So for me, it's like it's like all 3 are big wins and totally worth my money.
That's huge. They've always been doing great things. I love them.
Yeah, well, you already know I'm a super fan.
Yeah, I love it. Well, before we wrap up, I really want to touch on a couple experiences that you personally have gone through, or experiences that you've heard of from other colleagues and friends of yours. One, can you give us an example of a doctor-patient interaction that went much better than expected because the provider was culturally competent? And on the flip side, have you ever heard of an experience that went pretty sour or south because that provider unfortunately did not have any cultural competence?
Sure. So I'll actually give you both examples based on my own experience as a student, right? So I did all of my training at federally qualified health centers. I went to school at Northwestern Health Sciences University in Bloomington, Minnesota. And so my federally qualified health center clinical training put me in this arena where I was able to give care or train giving care to folks who were, lots of them were either underinsured or uninsured, and a fair number of folks who had refugee status, right? So I was, my first scenario, I'll tell you about the bad one first, right? Because it was very formative in the way that I communicate what it is I'm doing. So the patient comes in, she's Spanish speaking, and the other intern that I was training with is Spanish speaking as well, and a female, right? So the woman comes in, we're doing the history in Spanish, and I step behind her to do the standard sort of orthopedic exams for the neck, right? So I start doing touch the head, and I'm, doing a shoulder depression, and I touch the side of the neck, and my fingers curled around to the throat, and she froze and she started quivering. And so I came around the table, and I stood in front of her, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes," but she clearly wasn't okay. And I said, "Let me excuse myself for a moment, and let me have the female person come in, and let's just have her check in with you." So I have the female intern come in, and we just changed places. She just finished the care. There wasn't like this thing where, we're trying to get to the bottom of, what did I misunderstand or whatever. And so I left the room, and on the other side of that, what came to what came to become what I came to know was she had an experience in the country where she was from, where she had been both kidnapped and brutalized. And so by touching her without being clear about what I was doing in a way that she couldn't see me, triggered her in a way that I never, ever would want to carry into my practice. I go to work caring about the people that I do, and I don't want to contribute to their emotional, physical, social, psychological traumas, right? I want to help folks come on the other side of that, right? And not contribute to that. And so this thing that I really learned was, in particular with all of my with all of my patients, is that I'm extra clear about where I'm putting my hands and why. right? So I'm going to touch you here, and this is why. And so what has happened is, over the years, I've had patients say to me, I've never had a doctor be so thorough in the explanation of what they're doing. So, in the practice where I work now, we do myofascial release. So literally, it's like nonstop. I'm like, so I'm going to put my hand on your pec muscle here, and I'm going to move your arm. I need you to tell me if this hurts or it doesn't feel okay. I check in so much. And so that was a thing that started as a lack of cultural awareness, that I knew that she was a refugee, but I didn't put it into my mind that she might have like refugee trauma that I might contribute to. Okay. So that was my bad one. So here was my good one. So my good one was I was in a different federally qualified health center, and in Minnesota, there are a large number of Somali refugees. But in Somalia, or like in many places in the world, there are ethnic groups and tribes that are, they might say they're Somali, but it's only because they're from Somalia, right? So she was Oromo, and Oromo is a large ethnic group in the Horn of Africa, and they are both in Ethiopia and Somalia, and I think Eritrea as well. So the woman's checked in. She comes, and she is fully covered, and the translator is a male. And so the person, when they checked her in, said to me, okay, so your next patient is Somali, and she has her translator, right? So we bring them in the room, and so we start talking. And so I ask the questions. Okay, so thank you to the translator for coming. Tell me a little bit about why you're here. And this patient had a history of tuberculosis that was picked up, or she got tuberculosis in the refugee camp. So she's in the office, and she has this thoracic pain. She has what has been resolved tuberculosis of the thoracic spine. And she had this rib pain. And she comes in, and, in modesty religions, we have to be like really mindful again of the fact that, this privilege of taking care of folks, involves or requires the sort of meeting them where they are, and not making tons of assumptions. So I asked her, I said, so before we really, really get started in the examination process, I want to ask you a few questions. So how long have you been in the States, right? So she told me how long she'd been in the States, and I was like, okay, great. Where were you before this? And so she told me, and then I said, where did you grow up? And so she told me, and I said, oh, what is your language that you speak at home? And she said, Oromo. And I was like, oh, she's not even, I mean, like she might be Somali, but she's not Somali, she's Oromo. And so I said to I asked the patient, would this be a better experience for you if you came back tomorrow with your daughter or your sister? Because I need to see your ribs. I need to have you pull your shirt up, and I need you to feel comfortable doing that. And she said, I would feel more comfortable if my daughter came. And I said, okay, great. So the next question is, would you feel more comfortable if your translator were female as well? Right? And she would. So that's exactly what happened. So I finished doing all of the stuff, without the examination process. And we rescheduled. We scheduled her in. She came with her daughter. She came with the female translator. And then what I'm gonna tell you, this is like how private practice works, right? So she liked what we did. And then, her friend came to see us, and then her friend's daughter. And this is, that sort of cultural competence builds in the same way that it does, when you knock it out of the park with some soccer player's knee, then suddenly, everybody on the soccer team thinks you're great. Well, in this Oromo community, I had folks come see me because, as a student, because, we thought to ask, how to best take care of the patient. And it was a little inconvenient that we scheduled her twice, but it was absolutely the right thing to do for her.
My heart is like fluttering, because these are the things that are so important, and they require some effort, but they're always worth it in the long run. And could you have just kind of ignored all the things you were picking up on with that patient and just moved on, did your exam, helped the patient, helped her pain, gotten through it? Of course you could have.
Absolutely.
But because you went just slightly out of your way You created a better relationship with that patient and tons of future patients. And more importantly, you set up this amazing environment where someone's going to feel so much more comfortable with their healthcare. And that, at the end of the day, is the most important part of what we do. I love it. I mean, you just hit the nail on the head.
It's literally what Better Doctor Project's all about. Like, it's
Yeah.
those little things that make such a profound impact, and that, have a sort of butterfly effect that we probably don't even realize. I mean, how many patients do we see on a regular basis that had one bad experience with a physician or a nurse and decided never to go see that profession again, or maybe are like, hey, I haven't seen a doctor in 15 years because the last time that happened, well, I'm not going for my checkups either. And how many things are missed because of that? So the impact you can have it's just amazing. And I know sometimes we don't even think about those things. Maybe if you hadn't had that prior, I don't want to say negative experience, but challenging experience before, then you wouldn't have even thought to ask those particular questions in order to set the stage and set the environment. Because as a provider, to a degree, we are in control of that environment. And so it's up to us. It's our responsibility to know to ask those things. So are there any resources that you have for providers who are looking to get a little more culturally competent and a little more understanding when it comes to patient care?
So, that's kind of a tough question, right? So each sort of profession, including the American Public Health Association, will have some variations of, sort of curricular investments in the continuing education of their constituent members or professional members. I think that, the ultimate goal is cultural agility. And it means that I can't know everything about every group on the planet, because every person, and every family and every culture, is vastly different. So there's this sort of common respect. And I think that it is extraordinarily important to have an idea of, what the largest groups of folks are in an area. So, if you're practicing in an area in Atlanta and there's a group that, has a heavier population in that area, it would benefit the provider and the community to be clear about, even just like some history about, some region of the world. And so you ask about a specific resource, and I don't know about necessarily a specific resource, but what I do know is that when we start paying attention, that we start investigating on how to manifest improved cultural agility, that it kind of, comes in big leaps and bounds. Earlier in the conversation, we talked about not, we can't always get it right all the time. And I think that acknowledging that and being like, oh, wow, this is not what I wanted, which is exactly what happened with the first patient that I told you about, is like, oh, this is not what I want for you, right? So let's kind of make this right. I think that that is reflected in what I hear tossed around as cultural humility, is that I can't know everything, right? But I want to be teachable on behalf of my patients.
Yeah, be teachable and grow from every experience. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining us to talk about this tonight, Dr. William. We really appreciate you coming.
Perfect. I'm so glad that you all asked me to do this with you. And, I really look forward to your continued investment in making better doctors. So thanks.
Thanks so much. Doesn't he just make everything seem so attainable? One of the biggest reasons I love talking with Dr. Foshee is because he instantly makes any challenges appear well within reach. I always feel like I can just conquer the whole world after talking to him, and I hope you guys feel the same way and take today's message to heart. Let's use this conversation to fuel our patient experiences and goals that we have for the future of healthcare. We can do better, and we will do better with providers like you leading the way. For more about Dr. William Foshee, check out his Instagram page at Dr. Foshee Chiro. That's DrFoshee Chiro. We're going to also be linking his Instagram page in some of our Instagram posts, so feel free to check that out as well. I encourage you after this episode to really think about some of your current patients, or maybe just see what the next week or month brings you. Make an effort really to just establish better cultural competency within your practice. Make the decision to learn more about a specific type of population that maybe you see a little bit more heavily in your hospital or office setting. Remember, baby steps become those big steps, which ultimately lead to the change we want to see. You got this, guys.
We loved connecting with you today on this episode of the Better Doctor Project. We can't wait to share our next podcast with you in just 2 weeks. Same time, same place. Until then, pop over to Instagram to follow us at Better Doctor Project or keep up with us at betterdoctorproject.com.
Thank you for tuning in to the Provider's Report. We hope you found today's episode valuable and inspiring. To stay updated with our latest episodes, subscribe to our podcast wherever you like to listen. For more resources and continuing education opportunities, visit our website. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our patients and truly set a standard for value-based healthcare.